Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Max Verstappen is the 2022 Drivers' World Championship, and the FIA will certainly be hoping that overshadows what was an absolute shambles from them yet again today, especially this whole tractor incident we're going to dive into. Could have been a lot of far worse storylines today. I think the Formula 1 community is very lucky to get away with it, and the FIA are largely to blame. We'll dive into it here in a second. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. There are so many storylines to discuss today. We've just got to crack straight on. The race did begin pretty much on time. I was honestly surprised it did, in fairness, because it was raining, it was wet. First thing to mention here is, Lance Stroll came up on this dry line on the right-hand side and absolutely bombed past about 6 different cars. But the wet tyre is just so bad. Like, okay, it has deep tread, it is grippy in the wet conditions, but it's so hard and so slow that it's effectively never used. Like, none of the drivers here, like, these are clearly wet conditions. These are not really intermediate conditions. There's a lot of spray on track. Like, this is conditions where a wet tyre should be usable, but the Inter is just so much quicker, even in pretty much downright wet conditions, that the wet tyre never wants to be used, and therefore if it is actual wet conditions, the drivers don't want to do it anyway, and therefore they'll go to the Inter, because if they don't use the Inter, they don't have any grip at all, and therefore you can't really use it, right? And we saw that when the race began, mandated you do the formation lap at least before the rolling start on the wet tyre, but then like a lot of the drivers very quickly pitted for Inters, and they were like 5 seconds a lap faster. So just shows if the wet tyre was better, we'd have a lot better racing in the wet conditions this season. But unfortunately, after lap 1, they had to postpone the race and red flag it. Now, this was the incident that happened. Carlos Sainz, very lucky, honestly. Okay, Sainz aquaplanes, he goes off, smashes the car into the barrier, but he doesn't bounce back onto the track. He almost does, not quite. And when you can see cars flying past it, honestly, Hamilton must have missed Sainz here by a couple of meters maybe. He dislodged also this board, which was the start of all this incident. So this Rolex kind of advertising board was dislodged. Gasly runs into it and is running around with this kind of new rear wing concept here. And honestly, Gasly couldn't really see anything. He was on the radio telling his engineers, like, I can't see anything, tell me where I'm going. And you could argue at that point that Gasly should have just stopped the car and said, you know what, this is not safe, this is too dangerous, like, let's just call it a day here. But he wanted to get back to the pits. He did get back to the pits, and you can argue, you know, where Gasly was at fault for XYZ, but certainly there were other parties in play here at fault. So Gasly comes into the pits and he puts the new rear wing on, and then just before the red flag comes out and they say, you know what, we're going to need to clear this up and the rain's getting heavier and heavier, we've got to call this a day. I'm pretty sure the FIA would have known, and the race directorship would have known they were going to red flag this race. But before they did, of course, it was a safety car, and therefore Gasly was doing his best to try and catch up with the field. And this is what was going on. I honestly cannot believe this was actually a thing, especially because the key point here is really that 8 years ago in 2014, at this very track, a tractor just like this cost the life of Jules Bianchi in very similar conditions. And yet, however many years later, when the safety car was out, before the red flag was even out, there were marshals on the track. There's a tractor just sitting right there, and this tractor isn't off the track. This tractor is literally half on the track, and Max Verstappen goes past it, and I think Charles Leclerc, of course, for good reason, after his relationship with Jules Bianchi, was like, he saw this and immediately was like, why is there a crane on the track? And this could have ended incredibly badly, because like, if you watch the drivers onboards from this, they can barely see it until the very last minute. Like, the visibility is so bad. Obviously Max Verstappen can see it because his visibility is okay, he's leading the race, but for any other driver it's really bad. And this was the onboard of Pierre Gasly, so he was obviously coming out of the pits on with his kind of, they removed the thing off the front of his car, maybe changed the rear wing, not really sure, and he was trying to catch up to the field, and he was going very fast. Like, the yellow flags are out, he probably should have been going slower here, and then just before he got to where the tractor was, before he could even see it, the red flags came out. And okay, he may have seen the red flags, but at that point, if he brakes hard, he loses control of the car and probably slams into the tractor. So yeah, man, this is like, I mean, look at this. The tractor's literally half on the track. If you hit this, like, it's probably, you could be done and dusted, right? There's no doubt. And also, why is the tractor so like hard to see? The safety car lights up like a bloody Christmas tree, and the tractor is sitting here with 2 lights on the back that are barely visible. Like, I don't know, I'd have thought they'd have dealt with this by now. And Gasly comes past and immediately is absolutely fuming on the radio, like, how has this been allowed to happen again? And of course, it was the talk of the entire Formula 1 world, really, that this was allowed and permitted. The race directors had to allow this onto the track, and especially because they probably knew they were going to have to red flag it anyway. Why allow it on the track already? Like, when there's still cars on track, when there's marshals on track, like, or when there's cars on track, why put the marshals there. Like, absolute madness, honestly. And even Jules Bianchi's father, right, says on Instagram, just, no respect for the life of the driver, no respect for Jules's memory. So, I mean, yeah, wow, some strong words, and for absolutely good reason, because this could have ended an awful lot worse today than thankfully it ended up ending, right? And the thing that overly frustrates me about this is because the FIA have effectively tried to pin it all on Gasly and say it was Gasly's fault, saying here that, car 10 passed the location of the incident effectively too fast, and they ended up giving him a massive penalty for driving too quickly under red flag conditions. I believe their concerns were after he'd gone past the tractor, like at that point he was going too fast, which probably is fair enough. Gasly probably should have been going slower and being a bit more careful, but that does not excuse at all these actions from the directors to allow this tractor literally onto the track. I actually cannot believe what we have seen today, especially in these conditions. And as they said, right, okay, yeah, he was passing it in red flag conditions too fast, and yeah, as Will Buxton kind of accurately admits, like, okay, fair enough, but this is only great in that it was literally 1 second before he got to the track vehicle where it turned from yellow to red. Unbelievable scenes. And look, of course, the drivers are going to have their say. Every driver has said something on this at some point or another. Like, this is even one perspective here, actually, from the track side, where, I mean, even this from Sainz with all the cars flying past. You think about it, right, these cars probably can't even see Sainz until they get very close to him because of the poor visibility in these conditions. It's yeah, I mean, honestly, absolute madness, right? And as Lando says, like, we want a race, but this is straight up unacceptable. Similar comments here from Checo Perez. We lost Jules because of this mistake. What happened today is totally unacceptable. Hope this is the last time I ever see a crane on track. So, look, they're going to do a thorough investigation into this. I think Formula One in general is very, very lucky indeed to have got away today without something major happening, because as Gasly says, if he aquaplaned just like Carlos Sainz aquaplaned, like, that could be GG, like, that could be the ends, and like, it wouldn't be Gasly's fault, let's be honest here, because of the situation, and these are the words that he said on the matter as well. So yes, honestly, absolute madness. Thankfully, everyone's okay. We got through the race okay. These drivers are risking their lives out there. The FIA need to do their best to actually respect that and try and make it the safest possible condition. So understandable ire, really, and anger from the drivers on this and pretty much the entire community, and well, hopefully the FIA will deal with this somewhat appropriately. And well, one of the ways they arguably didn't deal with this appropriately is giving Gasly a 20-second time penalty and 2 penalty points on his license, saying he was driving too fast. That may be true, but it kind of sounds like they're trying to just deflect all the blame onto Gasly, whereas the reality is it was not Gasly's fault that there was a massive vehicle sitting there on the track when there were still cars going around at high speed under yellow flag conditions. Absolute mess, to be honest. But thankfully, the race actually gets back underway. It was postponed for about 2 hours while it was raining heavily. Finally, there was actually a race on our hands. And again, Verstappen, of course, was leading at this point. Charles Leclerc was pushing very hard early on to try and catch him up and destroyed his tyres. And that wasn't necessarily his fault. It's more the Ferrari's fault that we'll talk about a little bit more later on today. These are some of the highlights from the race. It was kind of a sprint race, really. Not that many laps of play. There was some great battling all across the field. The Hamilton versus Ocon battle was epic. Like, Hamilton was getting so close, but just didn't have the straight line speed to make a move. And around the outside of 130, you could sick this move in the dry, but in the wet, off the racing line, just wouldn't have the grip to make it happen. And Esteban was defending like a lion here. There's no doubt about it. Didn't really make any mistakes at all. Hamilton needed a mistake to get through despite driving. I mean, they both drove spectacularly here. It was a great battle to watch over the course of the race. And then this was happening towards the end. Leclerc's tyres went off a cliff. You can see here the treads practically disappeared, and Perez was closing up from behind. And then the key instant happened here, where on the final corner of the race, there was some question as to whether it should have been, like, Verstappen crossed the line with about 5 seconds to go or something, whether there should have been another lap. I think because it went to the 3-hour limit, that's why there wasn't another lap, and I think Leclerc didn't even realise there was another lap. He locked up going into the final corner, lost control of the car, went off the escape roads, pushed Perez off the track a little bit, and then gets a 5-second penalty for it. Like, if this doesn't just sum up Ferrari's season, final corner of the race, like, they kind of lose control of the car, get themselves a penalty, and gift the championship at that weekend over to Verstappen. Of course, Verstappen would have won it anyway next weekend's up in Kota, but like, at the end of the day, it's kind of classic Ferrari that after having such a great start that they had, they now have lost the championship with 4 races to go, which is quite the statistic. Leclerc only has himself to blame, really, but in fairness, he can also blame the car for not treating its tyres particularly well. Another Red Bull 1-2. Like, their dominance this season, when you look at it on the whole, has been kind of staggering. But unfortunately, we missed some of the crazy battles. Latifi finished P9, I think. George Russell had a couple of great overtakes from towards the back of the grid as well. And there was a great battle. Alonso pitted late on for a new set of inters, which I think might have been been the play for some other drivers as well, because like there was a massive delta, like 4 or 5 seconds a lap on those inters over the last few laps. Alonso overtook Russell and then was closing in on Vettel, and Vettel did a great bit of defense here around the outside to pip Alonso to the line. Two great champions by 0.011 of a second, 1/100th of a second between both of these men across the line. I think it's Vettel that ends up getting P6, and Binotto initially was unhappy with the penalty. Charles Leclerc has gone on to admit that, like, yeah, probably that was fair enough, and look, understandably, there's going to be some salts coming out of the Ferrari camp, and you can understand why, like, the frustration is going to be there after having such a good car to now just effectively been dominated in the championship the last few races is not a particularly good look. But when the race ended, everyone thought, myself included, that Verstappen was not the champion because there was not going to be, I thought at least, full race distance points given out. Now, they changed the rules on this after Spa last year Now they changed the rules on this after Spa last year to give these kind of like these columns, as Crofty described them as. So they did, I believe, 50% of the laps, maybe not quite 50. I think they did 50%. So it should have given out something in the ballpark of 19th for first, 14, 12, 10, and maybe it was 13, 10, who knows. But regardless, Verstappen wouldn't have gained enough points on Leclerc to win the championship with these numbers. This is what everyone believed. But for some reason, no one, I guess, had looked into closely enough the regulations in the rulebook, which had now been changed to state that this only applies if the race is run and then red flagged. You then look at, after the race is called off, you then look at how many laps were run. If the race finishes as a checkered flag under normal racing conditions, then regardless of the amount of distance raced, it gives full points. Like, this doesn't really make any sense, and how this was able to just get through without people noticing this is remarkable to me, because the teams didn't understand it. They thought it was going to be given a percentage of the points away. Red Bull thought this, Mercedes thought this, all the teams thought this, all the journalists thought this. The F1 guys knew it wasn't that way, and that's why the graphics on screen where I thought were wrong turned out to be correct. But yes, apparently, if the race resumes and finishes under a checkered flag conditions, it is 100% just guaranteed everyone gets all their full point allocation, which, as I think Andreas Seidel was saying, or one of the guys from McLaren was like, look, that's not the intention of what we wanted to achieve here, so we're going to have to change it. But in fairness, by the rules of the regulation, that's what they did. But it just seems like Verstappen can't win a championship without all the drama. But Chris Midland is right that literally you could race one lap of normal racing conditions, finish as a checkered flag, and that's full points for everyone. Like, even though, like, it doesn't really make any sense to do that. But in fairness, if there was one drive today that was definitely deserving of the world championship win, it was Max Verstappen's. Like, he dominated this race from start to finish. He pulled a bit of a gap on Leclerc early on, and then just destroyed him for the rest of the race. Yes, Leclerc's tyres were falling off, but he won this race, a 27-28 lap race, by 27 seconds or something. Like, an absolute champion's drive, especially in those conditions. And he now becomes the 11th man to become a back-to-back world champion, of course, with all these other legends. And the driver standings are now unassailable, with Perez now P2 in the drivers. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.